Hi, welcome to Nap Time Nutrition. I'm messing around with some new graphics here. You like my foliage? Give me a thumbs up. So today we're going to be talking about baby's first food. And there are a couple topics that I really want to address within this topic. There was some research that came out very recently about baby food. 95% of baby food tested having heavy metals in it. And that's really caused quite a stir in the mom community, in the parent community in general. And I want to address that. I also want to address the question of feeding your baby grains in the first year or two of life, because that seems to be another controversial topic. And you know me, I love controversy. So let's get started. Let's just talk about baby's first food. Can they digest cereal? Does it rot in their stomach? Do we need to avoid all pre-prepared baby food products at the store because it's going to lead to imminent awfulness? Okay, the first thing I want you to do is take a deep breath. If this is causing you a lot of anxiety, head back to the meditations that Joy did on Naptime Nutrition. You can search naptimenutrition.com for Joy or meditation and maybe take a step back and hit that first. So the first thing I would like to dispel is that starch rots in the gut. Nothing really rots in the gut. Can babies have starch? Okay, so the major idea here is that babies can't break down complex carbohydrates the way that adults do because they don't have pancreatic amylase. So I'm going to break that down. Pancreatic means coming from the pancreas. The pancreas has a lot of different functions in the body, but one of them is aiding in digestion by releasing hormones and, well, different issue. It does release hormones, but it releases enzymes into the small intestine to help with digestion. So starch is broken down largely in adults by pancreatic amylase. Anything that ends in ASE is an enzyme that's going to help break down food. So lactose is broken down by lactase and starch is broken down by amylase. So it is true that infants don't have a whole lot going on, but through their childhood, they do have an increase in this enzyme, but that is not the whole story. First, let's talk about what a complex carbohydrate is. You probably know what a carbohydrate is mainly because they have been demonized since the 90s. I'm not a big fan of that, but a carbohydrate is just anything that has a particular molecular structure. Anything that is going to be starchy is going to have, it's a complex carbohydrate. Unlike sugar, direct sugar is simple carbohydrate. It's broken down very quickly. Complex carbohydrates are broken down faster. That's not to say that simple carbohydrates are bad and complex carbohydrates are good. There's a whole mix. It's a much broader picture. We can't make very simple statements like that. For instance, fruit, very healthy, is largely simple carbohydrates, which is broken down quickly. So complex carbohydrates, specifically starches, are going to be found in bread, pasta, rice, cereals, potatoes, oats, other grains, peas, corn, and beans. And these are not really foods that you want to spend a lot of energy avoiding. They have beneficial aspects to them, even in infancy, especially in infancy. In 6 months old and older. So the thing is that digestion starts at the mouth. And the truth is that anyone who really loves being in the kitchen is going to tell you that digestion starts when you're food prepping, when you're seeing the ingredients, when you're working with them, when you have a tactile relationship, preparing these ingredients to become a meal. That's when digestion starts because it stimulates the glands in your mouth to start producing saliva. And that saliva is going to start the digestion. And if you do your food prep, rather compared to going out to a restaurant where you're not doing any of the food prep, you are going to have a little bit of an edge over the restaurant situation because you do have that extra saliva production from during the prep. It's not that significant, but your digestion starts in your mouth. Then it goes down into your stomach. And a lot of people think that digestion happens in the stomach. Not that much happens in the stomach. You have a couple things going on. You've got a lot of acid going in your stomach, which is going to wash off the food and make it safe. And you have a mechanical action. The inside of your stomach looks kind of like a washboard. Even if the outside doesn't, that's okay too. The inside looks like a washboard, and what it does is it grinds your food. So while that acid and some amount of digestive enzyme that came from your mouth As that all works together, the food is broken down mechanically and a little bit chemically with those enzymes as well. But once it empties into the small intestines and gets that digestive enzyme boost from the pancreas, that's when food digestion really hits its peak. So that brings us back to if babies, if at 6 months old and older, because we're recommending food be introduced around 6 months, if they are low in that amylase from the pancreas, how are they expected to digest complex carbohydrates? How are they expected to digest starch specifically? Well, all around the world, in lots of different places, between 3 days of life and 6 months of life, different cultures are introducing foods, and most of it is starch. If there was a problem, we would probably know about it. I mean, in Bhutan, they start at 3 days, which is definitely not recommended. A lot of the research that I'm quoting here comes from the 60s and 70s when they started to feed babies much earlier, 3 weeks, 4 weeks of life, also not recommended. But this is where it comes from. We do have a lot of evidence now. The initial evidence on why we shouldn't feed babies starch was really done in a way that does not replicate real life. And this is a really good point that I want to drive home, because the truth is that this happens a lot. When we see dramatic headlines, it often comes from a study that does not replicate a real life experience. We have in vitro versus in vivo. In vitro being this is what happens in a test tube. This is what happens in a petri dish. And in vivo meaning this is what happens in real life. So when you have a complex carbohydrate, a starch, put into a test tube that has all of your pancreatic enzymes for a child who is 4 months old, 5 months old, 6 months old, it was not going to digest that starch. What a baby is really relying on to digest that starch is the salivary amylase. Salivary amylase. So it starts when they're babies, when they're infants, and they're very young, they don't have a lot of that. But the production of salivary amylase increases as they get older. And by the time they're 6 months old, they do have a significant amount of salivary amylase in order to digest that starch. So it's perfectly healthy to give these babies that starch. Also, if that wasn't enough for you, we do have evidence that human breast milk is extremely high in amylase, and it does retain about 50% of its effectiveness into the small intestine of the baby who has digested it. So that means that you have a large amount of this enzyme to break down starch coming through the breast milk and being active in the small intestine. So you've got the salivary amylase in the mouth going through the stomach. You have the breast milk amylase, which is 25 times the amount of amylase you find in cow's milk. So this is really what it's intended for. And that comes through the mouth and goes into the stomach and has its action in the small intestine. So the claim that food rots in the intestines, they're really saying that it rots in the large intestine because it's coming through the small intestine without that boost from the pancreas. Well, now you have the salivary amylase coming through the mouth, the breast milk amylase acting in the small intestine. So what happens in the large intestine? There are a lot of things actually that hit the large intestine without being digested. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. If you have someone who has lactose intolerance, they're missing that lactase enzyme, you're going to see very specific reactions when they have milk without taking a supplement, without taking that enzyme. You're going to see lots of gas and discomfort and stuff that dietitians regularly talk about, but I'll spare you because you talk about what's in the diaper enough. You know where I'm going with this. That doesn't happen with babies who are fed grains for the most part. Yes, you're going to have a child here and there who does react to something, but for the most part, we're talking in generalizations, it's perfectly safe. So we also, one more thing, have glucoamylase in the small intestine. So while the traditional pancreatic amylase is not being put into the small intestine for a child, you do have glucoamylase, which is going to do a lot of that same heavy lifting. And so that's really where you're going to get most of your digestion, between those three sources: the salivary amylase, the breast milk, which is going to have that enzyme, and the glucoamylase. So does food rot in the large intestine? No, it doesn't. It gets broken down in different ways, and the small amount that's left over is used to feed the microbiome. You've probably heard this. It's a major buzzword, but that's the the microbes that are living in the large intestine, which have a symbiotic relationship. They produce vitamin K. They produce a lot of different things that help us to have a happy life. They support your immune system. They have a lot of interactions with your mood and other ways that they help digest food. There's just a lot going on with the microbiome. We learn more every day. So the amount of starch that is not digested by the salivary amylase, by the human breast milk, by the glucoamylase ends up feeding those bacteria. And yeah, that might end up with some farting, but that's okay. Babies fart, right? So if you are getting some really tough stomach issues, if you're seeing some discomfort, if you're seeing a distended belly and a distended belly button, that's something to discuss with your pediatrician or with your pediatric dietitian, because that could be a reaction to something. But on the whole, by and large, feeding babies cereal is perfectly fine. It's been done for a very long time in lots of places around the world, and there is plenty of evidence to suggest that they can adequately digest that. So now to bring us to the more recent research that is not from the 60s and 70s, to research that came out actually last week, it was published last week, saying that 95% of baby food tested had heavy metals in it. That's a really scary headline. And the truth is that we do need to pay attention to that. A lot of times headlines come up that are just, they're not really accurate representations of what the study actually concluded or what the discussion in the study is. And it doesn't look at the study methods. I covered this in another Naptime Nutrition with Tamara Rothenberg. We talked about the limitations on studies. Unfortunately, this study and how it's being promoted is very unfortunately fairly accurate. So what can you do about it? A lot of the starches that I mentioned, especially the oats, the pasta, the rice, these are your main sources of heavy metals right now. So when I was speaking before and saying they were safe, I was speaking in generalities, talking about digesting that size of molecule, that type of molecule. At this point, when we're talking about baby food that is tainted with heavy metals, it's coming not from the pesticides that it's being sprayed with, and somewhat not even really from the soil. It's coming from other environmental sources. So this is affecting both organic and conventionally grown produce. It's affecting some foods more than others. And the way that this affects pre-made baby food is that a lot of times carrots and sweet potatoes, which are two of the big offenders, are used as fillers. They're used for texture. They're used for flavor in baby foods. And so it may be a good thing to look at the label on the baby food and make sure that you're getting a lot of different types of fruits and vegetables. When you have variety in your diet, it minimizes the risk of all of these things that we're hearing about. How there's one type of bad thing in this food and another type of bad thing in that food. And no matter where you go, you can't seem to get away from it. The best way forward is to have a variety in your diet. And if you feel that you are giving your baby baby food and it seems to all have carrot in it or it all has sweet potato in it, try to diversify that a little bit. You might want to feed you might want to make some from home. You might want to try baby-led weaning, which is something that I'm a big fan of. And that's not going to be something that prevents you from giving your baby any heavy metals. We are all exposed to these things. And I am sure that now that this research has come out, there are going to be ways forward to limit our exposure to this and to limit our kids' exposure to it. But the best thing to do right now is to err on the side of whole foods. Look into baby-led weaning, and there is a fantastic course through Feeding Littles. I'll link to it in the comments, where she educates on baby-led weaning and how to do it, what the risks are and how to mitigate those. And I have a special code that'll get you 10% off if you're interested in that. But that's a way to easily give variety to your baby. If you are using purees, just try to get different types of foods in. So that's where we've landed with that research. And I wish I had better news for you. I wish I could say this is not a concern. It is a concern, but there are ways to mitigate it. And as we often come back to in nutrition, the way to mitigate this risk, along with many others, is by providing a variety of nutrition. So take that and do what you will with it. I am very open to questions in the comments section, and I'll get back to you as much as possible, with as much information as I have at my fingertips and with my resources. So that brings us to the end of this Naptime Nutrition. I'm Yaffi Lvova, owner of Baby Blue Nutrition, a toddler test kitchen, registered dietitian nutritionist, and I think I totally forgot to do that intro up front. If you're a Phoenix local, come to Toddler Test Kitchen. We made delicious roasted tofu lettuce wraps this morning. It was amazing, and the kids had a great time. Some of them even ate it. But the journey, it's all about the journey. It's all about the smile, not the bite. And if you are around next Tuesday at 1:15, I will be here every Tuesday, 1:15 Arizona time, which is changing because we don't change the clocks and the rest of you seem to. So look it up, 1:15 p.m. Arizona time, which is currently 4:15 in New York and 1:15 in California. And when you change your clocks, we will be 1 hour ahead of California and only 2 hours behind New York. So thank you for joining me. If you have any questions, concerns, or topic suggestions, please drop a comment in the comment box, and I look forward to hearing you. Thank you, and join me next week. You won't want to miss it.